When I took this job, I thought I was prepared. I imagined gloves, bleach, maybe a few stomach-turning sights, nothing I couldn't handle. But my very first assignment stripped away all those assumptions in minutes. It wasn't the gore that rattled me. It was the silence, the aftermath, the way a home holds on to the last moment like it's still playing out in the air. The call came mid-morning. A townhouse in a quiet suburban block. The kind of place where kids ride bikes and neighbors wave. You'd never guess something violent had just happened inside. According to dispatch, it was a homicide. The body had already been taken away, but the mess was still there. I arrived with Marcus, my supervisor and an old pro at this. He had the dead-eyed calm of someone who's seen too much, and didn't blink even as we crossed the threshold. But I hesitated. The smell was the first thing, coppery and heavy. Blood has a thickness in the air that makes it hard to breathe. It clings. In the kitchen, the floor was soaked, a wide, ugly pool of dried blood darkening the tile. You could see where the struggle started. A broken mug lay near the sink, like it had been thrown or dropped. There were smears on the fridge handle, bloody fingerprints, desperate and chaotic. On the wall above the stove, a red trail curved upward toward the ceiling, like someone had tried to stand or reach for help. It didn't work. There was something chilling about how normal everything else looked. A bowl of cereal was still on the table, soggy and untouched. A crossword puzzle lay unfinished next to it, the pen still resting in the crease. A remote control was on the couch, aimed at a blank television screen. The world had stopped in that room, frozen around the violence. Marcus tossed me a box cutter and told me to start cutting out the blood-soaked carpet. I knelt down and ran the blade through the fabric, the sound of tearing fibers loud in the dead silence. Every surface had to be scrubbed, sealed, disinfected. As we worked, I noticed the hallway door slightly ajar, and what I saw inside nearly broke me. It was a child's bedroom. Bright blue walls, toy cars neatly lined on a shelf, a drawing taped to the wall that read, "I love you, Daddy," in crooked crayon letters. That was the moment it all hit me. This wasn't just a job. Someone had lived here. Someone had died here. And now I was the last person to touch their world before it disappeared. We worked into the evening. The blood was gone, replaced with bleach and fresh drywall patches, but something lingered. Not in the air, not in the room, in me. I kept seeing that drawing, that cereal bowl, that frozen moment before everything unraveled. I didn't sleep that night. I just stared at the ceiling, realizing that death doesn't knock. It barges in and leaves people like me to clean up the pieces. 2 weeks after my first cleanup, I got a new assignment. This one felt different before we even stepped inside. The call came just after sunrise. 5th-floor apartment, possible suicide, confirmed decomposition. Summer had just begun, and that meant something awful. The body had been sitting in there festering in the heat, the kind of scene you never forget. I was paired with Jason, a quiet, broad-shouldered guy who'd been doing this for years. He didn't say much, but when he did, you listened. That morning he only said one thing: "Don't touch the mirror." We arrived at a gray concrete building on Drexel Street, halfway between forgotten and condemned. The hallway stank, an oily, sickly sweet smell that got stronger the closer we got to the unit. The door was slightly open, like it had been nudged but never fully shut. Jason pushed it the rest of the way and paused. He didn't step inside right away, and I quickly saw why. The apartment was almost too clean. Not lived-in clean. Empty clean. A single wooden chair stood in the middle of the living room, beneath a wooden ceiling beam. On the floor below it, a huge dark stain spread like a shadow, dried into the flooring. A thick frayed rope hung from the beam above, swaying slightly. No body, but everything about the scene screamed finality. According to the coroner's notes, the man had taken his own life days before. But Jason muttered, almost to himself, "This isn't right." The walls were what confirmed it. From floor to ceiling, the entire apartment had been covered in black Sharpie marker. Thousands of words, rambling, overlapping, obsessive. Most of it was nonsense. Scribbles, symbols, disconnected phrases. But one sentence repeated over and over like a mantra: "I am not the body." It was scrawled on walls, outlets, even across the windows. On the inside of the front door, it was written in thick block letters, over and over: pressed so hard it had cut into the paint. Then we found the bathroom. The mirror had been etched, carved with a sharp object. The message said, "When the door opens, don't look at the face." Jason stepped back. His knuckles were white around his cleaning kit. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs. There was no power in the apartment, no noise, just the echo of our breathing and the soft creak of that hanging rope above the chair. Then Jason found the bedroom door. It had been sealed with layers of duct tape, and written across it in red ink were the words, "Keep out." Jason didn't hesitate. He slit the tape open and pushed the door inward. What we saw inside still haunts me. The entire room had been blacked out. The walls, ceiling, even the windows were painted pitch black. Not a single inch of light got in. In the center of the bed sat a small hand-sewn doll. It was made of old rags, bound with red string, and it had a crude face, just a wide red grin with no eyes. We didn't touch it. We didn't speak. Jason just quietly shut the door and said, "We clean the living room. That's it." As we worked around the stain under the chair, I noticed something lodged between the radiator and the wall. It was a photograph, old and curling. A man, a woman, and a child, standing in a park. The man looked like the victim. The child's face had been violently scratched out with pen or nail. On the back of the photo, in faint ink, it said, "We were real once." Jason didn't say another word the entire drive back. When he handed me my pay envelope, he just said, "Some people go missing inside their own heads. Sometimes they don't come back." That night I dreamed about the chair, and the rope, and those words on the wall, echoing over and over, "I am not the body." Some scenes feel wrong the moment you arrive. Before you even step inside, your instincts tell you to walk away. That was exactly how I felt when we pulled up to the farmhouse on the edge of Greene County. It was late autumn, leaves on the ground, gray skies, the air sharp with cold. The property sat deep in the woods, no neighbors for miles. The caller had been the new owner, a young couple who had just inherited the place from a distant uncle. They hadn't lived there long. They called because of the smell, and because something kept scratching at the attic door at night. When we got there, the couple waited outside, pale and visibly shaken. The woman clutched a baby monitor like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She said the noise started 3 days ago, soft tapping, then dragging, but it was the smell that made them leave. They hadn't been in the attic, not once, and refused to go back in. That's where we came in. The house itself looked frozen in time. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls. Dust clung to everything. We moved carefully from room to room, documenting signs of decay, mold, old water damage, and that steadily growing stench of rot. It didn't take long to find the attic door. It was a narrow hatch in the hallway ceiling, with a short cord dangling like a string from a light bulb. Jason gave it one look and said, "You're going first." The ladder creaked under my weight as I pulled myself into the crawl space. It was pitch black, so I flicked on my headlamp and instantly froze. Dozens of dead birds were scattered across the attic floor, their wings splayed, beaks open as if frozen mid-scream. Flies buzzed lazily in the stale air. In the far corner sat a rocking chair. It was gently moving just a little, and behind it something slumped in the shadows. I stepped closer and felt the floor stick under my boots. The smell was unbearable. Then I saw it. A human body, partially mummified, wrapped in an old quilt. Judging by the clothes, it was the uncle. But something wasn't right. The body was propped against the wall, arms folded neatly across the chest. Around him were dozens of notebooks, opened and arranged in a circle. Jason joined me, scanned the scene, and muttered, "Don't read any of it out loud." I asked why. He just shook his head. As we packed the body for transport, I couldn't stop looking at the notebooks. One had a torn photograph tucked inside. It showed the attic years ago, before the decay. In the photo there was the same chair, and the same man sitting in it, but there was something else in the image too. Something standing behind him, faint, almost invisible. But there, on the back of the photo in faded ink, it read, "It waits upstairs. It won't leave if you look." We finished the cleanup and sealed the attic. But just before I descended the ladder, I looked back. The rocking chair had stopped moving. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I didn't. There was something in that attic. Something that watched, and I don't think it stayed behind. Some jobs come through with almost no information, just an address and a request for biohazard cleanup. That's what we were told about the room at the old roadside motel, 6 off Route 17. A guest had checked in under a fake name, stayed for 2 nights, and never checked out. When the manager finally unlocked the door, he ran out screaming. He didn't say what he saw. He just called 911 and quit his job on the spot. The body had already been removed when we arrived, but the room still whispered. It was one of those cheap motel rooms you could find anywhere in the country. 2 twin beds, stale air, faded carpet, a clunky old TV, and tacky artwork nailed to the walls. But this one had something extra. Mirrors. Not just one on the bathroom door. Like normal, every surface had one. Some were framed and nailed. Others were handheld or cracked and propped up on furniture. Even the ceiling had mirrored tiles glued haphazardly overhead, as if someone had become obsessed with watching themselves from every angle. And then there was the blood. It had been wiped partially, but not well. On the bathroom mirror, smeared in bold streaks, was a message: "Do not turn around." Jason took one look and muttered, "We're not alone in here." He always had a sixth sense for this kind of thing. I didn't argue. The room stank of old sweat, chemicals, and something else, burned metal maybe. The bedding had been torn apart. Deep cuts had been made into the mattresses, almost like someone was searching inside them, and on every single mirror, every one, there were messages, written in blood, scratched with nails, etched in lipstick, repeating over and over like a warning caught in a loop. Don't look at her. She lives in the glass. If you see her eyes, it's too late. I stood frozen near the dresser when I noticed one mirror hadn't been cracked. It was perfectly clean, untouched. A rectangular vanity mirror leaning against the wall facing the bathroom. My reflection looked back at me, only it didn't. The face staring back was mine, but it wasn't following me. It wasn't blinking. It smiled when I didn't. I stepped back. The smile stayed. Jason slammed the door to the bathroom and covered the mirror with a towel. "We're finishing this fast," he said, his voice low. He didn't say why, but I understood. As we scrubbed, I avoided the reflections. Even the TV was turned off. We didn't want to see anything staring back. While bagging debris, I found a notebook tucked into the nightstand drawer. Only a single page had writing on it. I thought it was just me at first, but she's behind everyone. Always. I closed the book and didn't read further. Before we left, I made one mistake. I glanced, just a glance, into the full-length mirror near the door. For half a second I swear I saw 3 people. Jason, me, and her, standing between us. Her face wasn't clear, just eyes, dark and wide, like they had never blinked. Watching, the manager refused to re-rent that room. They nailed the door shut the next day, but every so often someone walking past swears they hear the sound of whispering, and if you peek through the keyhole, some say you can still see a light on, and a shape moving slowly, just behind the mirror. The request came in from a sheriff's office in a rural county I'd never heard of, somewhere between the Appalachian foothills and a place even Google Maps struggled to label. The message was simple: "We need a biohazard team for a cleanup at St. Lilith's Church. Abandoned. Deceased unknown." No further details. That alone was odd. Usually even the vaguest calls came with a name, a cause, or at least a coroner's report. But not this time. St. Lilith sat at the edge of a long-dead mining town. The church had been boarded up for decades, yet someone or something had been there recently. When we pulled up, the front doors were wide open, as if inviting us in. There were no birds, no wind, just stillness, like the world had forgotten this patch of land existed. The building leaned to one side, its steeple crooked, paint peeling from ancient wooden walls. It looked like it might collapse under its own memories. Inside, dust choked the air. The pews were still aligned, though most were rotted through. Candles had been recently burned down to their stubs, wax fresh, trails running like tears down the altar steps. At the front, the crucifix had been inverted, deliberately, and surrounding it were hundreds of small objects. Bones, tiny bones, some of them human, infant-sized, arranged in patterns we couldn't make sense of. Then we saw the stairs. Behind the pulpit, half concealed under a collapsed banner that read "The Lord is watching," was a trapdoor, padlocked, but clearly opened recently. Jason pried it up with a crowbar, and we descended into the dark, with only our headlamps for company. The basement of the church was much deeper than expected, carved into stone, not brick. It stretched in unnatural directions, more like a crypt than a cellar. There were rooms down there, dozens, carved alcoves filled with cages, chains bolted to stone, ritual markings scorched into walls. In one room we found a child's crib, its mattress blackened and burned. No one had slept here peacefully. Whatever rituals were done in this place weren't for God. The air grew colder as we moved, like we were stepping backward in time. One room was covered entirely in mirrors, all shattered. In another, we found what looked like an altar made of rib bones and jawbones, arranged into a throne. Something had sat there, recently, and then we found the tunnel. It was a narrow opening in the back wall, leading deeper underground. We followed it for about 30 feet before we hit the worst of it. A chamber round and wide. At the center, a pit, deep, seemingly bottomless. Around it, piles of what had once been people, dozens of them, all arranged in circles, as if sleeping toward the center, but they weren't sleeping. Every body was twisted into the same posture, arms crossed, heads tilted, eyes open and missing. Something had plucked them out. One body was still warm. Jason said something moved behind us. I turned, saw nothing, but I swear, I felt breath on my neck. We didn't speak the entire ride back. The official report said it was a mass grave from a long-forgotten cult, but there were no records of this church existing. No congregation, no founding date. As far as county records went, St. Lilith's had never been built. And yet, we cleaned it. Sometimes I wonder if it was ever really there, or if we were led there, drawn in by something that wanted to be seen or remembered. The dispatcher thought it was a prank at first. A 911 call had come in from a small 2-story home in a quiet suburb, static heavy, no voice, just the sound of breathing. The same house had called in 4 times over the last 2 weeks. Every time when emergency services arrived, it was empty. On the 4th call, the police finally did a full sweep. That's when they found the family. The house belonged to the Levinsons, mother, father, and 2 young children. They were found upstairs in their beds, not posed, not mutilated, just dead. No signs of violence, no struggle. The only oddity was that every mirror in the house had been removed, or covered in thick sheets. Phones were unplugged, windows painted over in black. And worst of all, the family had been dead for at least 2 weeks. That meant the calls came after they died. When we arrived, the place was still sealed. The coroner had ruled it undetermined cause of death. Toxicology came back clean. No gas leak, no poisoning. They simply stopped being alive. The living room was coated in a thick chalky dust, like ash, but too fine, clinging to every surface. The family dog was found in the basement, alive but blind, whimpering non-stop at the far wall like something was behind it. Jason was rattled before we even stepped inside. "This place is still active," he muttered, tapping his gloves nervously. "You feel that?" I did. The air felt heavy, charged, like just before a thunderstorm. But instead of lightning, it was something else, like a presence that never blinked. On the upstairs hallway wall, written in red crayon, were the words, "We only hear her when we sleep." Each bedroom told a different part of the story. The master room had its mattress flipped over, a deep gouge in the underside like something had tried to claw out. The children's room was wrong. Their toys were placed in a perfect circle. Every one of their drawings showed the same thing, a tall woman with long black arms and no eyes, always drawn with her head tilted sideways, like she couldn't hold it up. Underneath one drawing in shaky handwriting, "She talks from the phone now." I found the house phone unplugged in the kitchen, but when I picked it up, it was warm. There was no dial tone, just static, and then a whisper. I dropped it instantly. In the hallway closet we found a single mirror the police had missed. It was small, handheld, and wrapped in cloth. Jason unwrapped it just enough to peek. He turned white. "We need to go," he said. "She's still here. We didn't finish that job. We left our gear and never submitted an invoice. That house was demolished 6 months later, but the calls haven't stopped. Last I heard, a dispatcher in the county recorded another static-heavy 911 call just last week. The number came up as disconnected, and the location, same address. A house that isn't there anymore, still calling for help." It was a routine job, or at least it was supposed to be. A death at a small-town nursing home. Natural causes, no investigation needed. But the facility had an odd request. They didn't want us to clean the room where the man died. Instead, they needed us to sanitize a lower maintenance area that had been recently rediscovered. That wording alone gave me pause. When we arrived, the staff seemed off, nervous, jumpy. A nurse finally admitted the truth. They'd found a basement level none of them knew existed. Not on the blueprints. No key. Just a sealed door in the laundry room that had recently swung open on its own during a power outage. No one knew how long it had been there. We headed down with flashlights. The stairs were old, far older than the building itself. Crumbling stone steps led down to a hallway that reeked of rot and rust. The walls were lined with what looked like old storage rooms, but every door was heavy, reinforced, like holding cells. Inside each was a simple cot, a chain on the wall, and long scratch marks gouged into the concrete. Each room also had a number painted in red. Room 1, Room 2, all the way to Room 12. Then we found Room 13. It had no door, just a narrow corridor that led to a circular chamber with mirrored walls. Jason muttered, "This isn't a basement. This was a ward." In the center of the chamber was an iron chair, bolted to the floor. Straps still dangled from the arms and footrests. On the wall behind it, carved deep into stone, was one word: forget. We began our cleanup: dust, debris, general biohazard procedure. But something wasn't right. My flashlight flickered in every room but 13. Jason's EMF scanner, which we normally used for chemical detection, began spiking as if something was pulsing through the air. The deeper we went, the heavier it felt, like we were pushing through time itself. Then I found the tapes, in an old file cabinet outside. Room 7 were dozens of reels, film reels, each labeled with dates from the 1940s to the 1970s. One was unspooled and partially burned. I held it to the flashlight beam and caught a single frame burned into my memory. A man strapped to the iron chair, his mouth wide open in a silent scream, and a dark silhouette standing behind him with no face, just a smear, like a shadow had forgotten how to wear a human form. I don't know how long we were down there. Time stopped meaning anything. But when we returned to the ground floor, the staff had changed. Gone were the familiar nurses. In their place were different uniforms, different name tags. One woman looked up at us and said, confused, "How did you get in here?" This facility was condemned in 1989. We ran. Later I checked the nursing home's records. It had been shut down over 30 years ago. The building was demolished in 1990. We'd cleaned a place that didn't exist anymore. But that iron chair, I still see it in my dreams. And every time I wake up I find a single word scratched into my wall: forget. It started with a welfare check. A neighbor had called the police about a strange smell coming from the old Winthrop residence, an aging colonial house on the edge of town, long abandoned. They assumed it was squatters, maybe an overdose. But when the officers forced the door open, they didn't find people. They found trees. Real, living trees. Pulled ancient ones. Not potted plants or overgrowth from a neglected yard, but massive oaks and willows growing from inside the floorboards, their roots bursting through the wood and sinking deep into the earth beneath the foundation. Vines coiled like veins across the walls, wrapping around furniture, strangling picture frames, splitting windows with quiet force. The house was a forest. Our job was to handle the scene cleanup. Police had found bones, lots of them, half buried in the soil covering what was once the living room floor. Not a single full skeleton, just parts. Pieces fused into the roots as if the trees had fed on them. Some looked human, others didn't. Jason was quiet as we stepped inside. He pointed to the ceiling. Moss covered the chandelier like a crown, dripping moisture. The air was humid, but not warm. It felt like walking through a swamp in the dead of winter. That's when I saw the pictures. Along one wall, partially obscured by ivy, were dozens of photographs pinned to cracked drywall. Old family photos, parents, children, birthday parties. And in every single photo, whether it was in the corner of the frame or behind a window or mirror, there she was. A woman, always watching, always just there, unmoving, faceless. In one image, she was behind the child blowing out candles. In another, peering through the window behind the parents kissing. And in the final photo, dated 2 months ago, she was standing in front of the house, closer than before. In the kitchen, we found a tape recorder sitting on a moss-covered counter. I hit play. A man's voice, strained and trembling, whispered, "She comes through the roots. Every time we prune, she punishes. The forest isn't outside. The forest is her." Then scraping, a dragging sound, followed by a final breath. We followed the vines to the basement door, now split down the center as if something had broken through from the other side. Beneath it was a staircase overgrown with mushrooms, soft and pulsing. The walls were wet, and at the bottom, nothing. Just dirt. Endless, soft, rich black soil, with footprints, barefoot, leading into the dark. Jason refused to follow. I didn't blame him. I stood at the threshold and listened. And the trees were whispering. They spoke with no wind, no movement, just pressure. Like they were remembering you. Like they'd already tasted your name. Most of the time we're called in after the aftermath. Blood, decay, the usual horrors left behind by very real violence. But this call came from a tech company in the city, one of those nondescript buildings filled with servers and endless halls of humming machines. They didn't need us for a cleanup. Not yet. They needed us to see why they might soon need one. The head of security met us in the parking lot. He looked sleep-deprived, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling slightly as he unlocked the front door. He didn't say much, just handed us a USB drive and pointed us toward the main surveillance room. Inside, hundreds of monitors flickered. Most were standard security footage, empty hallways, stairwells, break rooms, nothing unusual. But then he queued up the footage from camera 43. The timestamp read 3:12 a.m., 4 nights ago. We watched the janitor, an older man named Carlos, mop the break room, humming softly to himself. Then, out of nowhere, the lights flickered. For 2 seconds, the feed turned to static. When it returned, Carlos was still in the room. But he was frozen, staring directly into the camera, mop resting upright like he was posing. For 7 straight hours. No blinking, no movement, no cuts, just that same eerie stare. But here's the kicker. Carlos was never in the building that night. Timecard logs confirmed he had called in sick. The room was supposed to be empty. The next clip, timestamped 3:13 a.m. the following night, showed another janitor, Melissa, entering the same break room. As she approached the mop closet, the camera glitched again. When the footage cleared, there were now 2 Melissas in the frame. One standing by the coffee machine, and the other opening the closet door. The one by the closet tilted her head and smiled, not with her mouth, but with her eyes. An unnatural stretch of muscle and intention that didn't feel human. Both Melissas then looked up in unison, directly at the camera. They stayed like that until the footage cut. We asked to see the physical break room. It looked normal, but the mop closet was wrong. Behind the mops and buckets was a second door, disguised as part of the paneling. It wasn't on the building's blueprints. Jason pushed it open. Inside we found a small windowless room lined wall to wall with CCTV monitors, all displaying the break room from different angles, even though there was only one camera. And in the center of the room was a chair, facing the monitors. The chair had straps. There was a note pinned to the wall above it, scrawled in childlike handwriting. He learned by watching. We backed out slowly. I took one last look at camera 43's feed as we left. The break room was empty, until the lights flickered, and we saw ourselves walking in. You've probably passed one of those hotels before. Modest, dated, but still clinging to four-star status thanks to a decent location and some clever marketing. The Hargrave Plaza was one of those places. Tired beige towers stuck between glassy new builds. The carpets hadn't changed since the 90s. The wallpaper peeled in corners. The lobby piano hadn't worked in years. But it wasn't the decor that gave me chills. It was the locked door on the 14th floor. We were called in after a front desk employee went missing during his night shift. No signs of struggle, no broken locks. The CCTV, which was conveniently down for maintenance, never captured him leaving. His last recorded action was answering a call from room 1408. But room 1408 had been sealed shut since 1998. According to hotel management, the room had been involved in a historic incident. No details were offered, but they said the entire floor had been cleared that night, and 1408 had remained locked ever since. Still, the system insisted that a call had come from there. We were called in not to clean up, but to investigate, a precautionary walkthrough, they said. We brought our hazmat gear, not knowing what we might find. A hotel manager, pale and sweating, unlocked the door for us. The instant the seal broke, I felt it. A pressure shift, like entering a vacuum. The room was immaculate. Everything was covered in plastic sheets, as if prepared for renovation that never happened. On the dresser sat an old rotary phone, receiver off the hook. Next to it was a guest logbook, its last entry dated June 3rd, 1998. Still here, can't find the door. Every hallway leads back to the room. Jason ran a hand along the wall. This place isn't abandoned, it's just paused. We inspected the bathroom. Dry, clean, nothing odd. The bed was neatly made, but the moment we turned to leave, we heard the click. The door had closed itself, then locked. From the inside, the phone rang. Jason froze. "Don't answer it," he whispered. But it was already off the hook. We didn't hear a voice, not at first, just breathing. Then a phrase, repeated over and over in a static-drenched whisper. "Check out, check out, check out." I grabbed my pry bar and forced the door open. It took 3 tries, but it finally gave. When we got out, the hallway was different. Carpet pattern changed, wallpaper newer. The emergency exit map on the wall said we were on the 13th floor, even though we had climbed 1 floor up from the 13th earlier. Jason pulled out his phone. No signal. Back at the lobby, the manager asked how it went. But the man standing behind the desk wasn't the one who let us in. He looked confused. "You must be mistaken," he said. "Room 1408 was demolished years ago. That wing doesn't even exist anymore." We turned, looked at the elevators. There were only 13 buttons. Later we checked our phones. The audio recorder had captured the entire encounter. Except in the background, beneath our own voices, was a second set of footsteps. And at the end of the file, a faint voice, barely audible. "Still here, can't find the door. Every hallway leads back to the room." It began like most crime scene cleanups do. A standard call from law enforcement about an unattended death. The report was vague. Male victim, estimated to be in his 30s. Found in the basement of an abandoned house scheduled for demolition. Foul odor reported by urban explorers led the cops to the site. They didn't tell us much more than that. When we arrived, the air was already thick with formaldehyde and mold. Jason gagged into his sleeve. The house was a skeleton. Plaster walls peeled back to studs, wooden floors warped from decades of neglect. But it was in the basement where things turned strange. The body was lying face up, arms stretched outward, eyes wide open. But here's the thing. It wasn't decomposing, not bloated, not discolored, no insect activity. In fact, the skin was cold and dry, almost rubbery. At first I assumed it had been preserved, but the coroner confirmed no embalming fluid had been used, and the internal organs, completely hollowed out. No heart, no lungs, no liver, just an empty cavity beneath the ribcage. Even stranger, the bones didn't look right. The joints were all slightly off. Knees bending just a bit too far, shoulders misaligned. as if someone had constructed a replica of a human skeleton from memory and gotten the details almost right. Jason noticed it first. The fingertips, each nail had a tiny slit at the center, almost like pupils. When he looked closer, he saw the slits moving, tightening in the dim light like a cat's eye. We backed up. That's when the chest made a sound, a wet clicking noise, like something shifting just beneath the skin. I turned to grab the cleanup gear, and that's when I noticed it. The body had moved, slightly, just enough for its right hand to now be brushing the floor, fingers curling inward, like they were testing gravity. I radioed the on-site officer. No answer. Jason went up the stairs to check for him. I stayed, and then I made a mistake. I touched the body. Immediately the skin rippled under my glove, like something was pushing outward from the inside. I yanked my hand back, but it was too late. A sharp stinging sensation pulsed through my fingers. The glove had split. Beneath it, a shallow slice on my palm began to burn. I heard footsteps overhead, fast. Jason came flying down the stairs, pale as a ghost. "He's gone," he panted. "The cop. He's not outside. His car's still running. Keys in the ignition." We didn't wait. We called it in, documented the scene, and left. A full hazmat team came the next day. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. 2 weeks later, I started seeing things in the corners of mirrors. My reflection not quite matching me, moving slower, breathing out of sync. Then just yesterday, I found a small slit at the center of my palm. It dilated when I turned off the light. Some cleanups happen in morgues, and those are always unsettling, but not for the reasons you'd think. Death becomes routine in those places. Cold rooms, steel drawers, clinical efficiency. It's quiet, too quiet, but there's a strange kind of peace in knowing everything in the room is supposed to stay still. Until the night we worked the Linden County Forensic Center. We were brought in for a chemical spill in one of the examination rooms. Nothing major, but when we arrived, the head coroner pulled us aside and asked if we could check something out while we were there. His voice was shaking. "Room 3, the mirror." We thought he meant the overhead observation glass, where visitors or trainees could view autopsies. But he clarified, a standing mirror. A full-length antique sitting in the corner of room 3. According to him, it had been donated decades ago by a retiring pathologist who had some superstition about watching the dead. He claimed that over the last week, staff had been reporting oddities, things showing up in the reflection that weren't in the room. Mostly subtle at first, a clipboard on the wrong table, a drawer closed in the mirror, open in real life. The last night an assistant ran out screaming. She'd seen herself in the mirror, but her reflection was crying even though she wasn't. Room 3 was dark, empty, cold steel tables gleaming under fluorescent lights. The mirror stood at the far end, its wood frame cracked from age. Jason walked up first and stood in front of it. "Looks fine to me," he said. "Just dusty." But I noticed something immediately. Jason's reflection wasn't matching his movements. When he scratched his head, the reflection hesitated, delayed by maybe half a second. Then it smiled. Jason didn't. I shouted, and he backed away instantly. Then we both saw it. In the mirror behind Jason's reflection, there were bodies not lying on tables, but standing upright, their faces covered in autopsy sheets, arms limp at their sides. I turned around. Nothing was behind us in the real room, but in the mirror, they were getting closer. We closed the door behind us and called security, but they said room 3 had been offline for 2 days, cordoned off for repairs. No one should have been in there. The next morning we checked back in. The mirror was gone. Security footage showed an orderly wheeling it down the hallway at 2:14 a.m. He wasn't scheduled for any shift that night. In fact, his employment record had no last name, just a first, Edwin. And here's the thing, he looked exactly like the pathologist who originally donated the mirror, the one who died in 1973. It was a rainy Wednesday when we got a call from a private storage facility in a small industrial town. You know the type, rows of metal doors, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and a lingering scent of mildew in the air. The facility manager reported a biohazard smell leaking from Unit B37, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual, he said, was that Unit B37 didn't exist on any official documentation. No key, no digital record, no paper trail. He only discovered it because the night guard heard whispering from that row, and when they investigated, they noticed an unmarked unit wedged between B36 and B38, a space that on the blueprints was just blank wall. We arrived the next morning. The door to B37 looked like the others, corrugated steel, rusted lock. But when the manager handed us the bolt cutters, we noticed something strange. The lock was new, brand new, untouched by time or weather. We snapped it open and lifted the door. Inside was a single table, a flickering bulb overhead, and a row of old CRT televisions stacked against the back wall. 5 in total, each one displaying grainy black and white footage from different angles, hallways, basements, parks, no timestamps, no sound, just static humming and constant surveillance. Then we saw the screen on the far right. It showed us, standing in Unit B37, right now. Jason waved his hand. The screen reflected the motion instantly. No delay. That's when the footage jumped. Suddenly it showed us dead. Jason slumped over the table, blood pooling beneath him, and me, missing, just gone. The feed looped again and again. We unplugged the TVs, all of them, but the one showing us stayed on. The cord dragged across the floor, completely severed. We backed out, locked the unit, and demanded an investigation. The police arrived later that day, but when they opened Unit B37 again, there was nothing inside, just concrete floors and a blank back wall. No table, no TVs, no smell. The manager swore it was the same unit. We even checked our photos, but every image of the TV screens came out black, like they'd never been recording. A week later, I got an anonymous package. No return address. Inside was a mini cassette tape. I played it. It was a recording of my own voice, saying, "Don't go in the unit. You're not supposed to see what's coming." Then silence. Jason doesn't remember saying anything that day. And the facility, it was demolished the month after. Fire code violations, apparently. But sometimes I drive by the empty lot, and every time I do, my phone's camera app opens by itself. The call came from a realtor who was trying to prep an old farmhouse for sale. It had been abandoned for over 15 years, left to rot after its previous owner, a solitary woman in her 70s, was found dead at the base of the stairs. The case was ruled an accident. The whispers in the area suggested something else, something about the walls. According to the realtor, several contractors had quit halfway through the job. One man claimed he saw his own dead dog waiting at the bottom of the staircase. Another said the kitchen door screamed when you touched it. Not creaked, screamed. We chalked it up to local superstition. Houses hold trauma. That's nothing new. But this house, it held something alive. From the moment we walked in, it felt like we were being watched, not by eyes, but by the structure itself. The floor groaned beneath us, not from weight, but like it was shifting in anticipation. The wallpaper in the upstairs hallway was peeling in thick, wet curls and stained a deep, dark red. "Is that mold?" Jason asked. I ran my finger across it. It was warm, sticky, not mold, blood. That's when we noticed the pattern. Every stain on the wall trailed downward in smooth lines, like it had leaked from behind the plaster, not onto it. We checked the attic. Dry. No pipes above, no rodent remains, nothing that could explain it. And then it started happening in real time. We were reviewing photos in the living room when the house went still, unnaturally still. Not even the wind outside touched the windows. Then, with no warning, the walls around us began to weep. Thin streams of red liquid dripped slowly from the seams between floorboards and baseboards. The smell was metallic, sharp. Jason panicked and said, "We need to go." That's when the walls responded. The blood flow stopped instantly. We froze. "I don't think it wants us to leave," I said, half joking. The walls began to bleed again. That's when I understood. It was reacting to truth and lies. "We tested it," I said. "I feel safe here." The blood gushed. Jason said, This house is beautiful. The ceiling cracked above us, but when we told the truth, admitting we were afraid, that we felt watched, that the house didn't want us there, the bleeding slowed, then stopped. We packed up fast. But here's the part that stays with me. On our way out, Jason turned and muttered, "We'll be back soon." The moment those words left his mouth, the front door slammed shut on its own, so hard the glass shattered. We haven't returned, but sometimes I get dreams of that house, and in every dream, it's not bleeding anymore. It's calling me by name. Hospitals are among the most chilling places we get called to. Death lives in every corridor, but this call was different. We were asked to assist in cleaning a recently discovered wing at Brightmoor Regional Hospital, where a nurse claimed the hallway had appeared overnight. The official story was that old blueprints showed a section plan but never completed. But when staff went to inspect it, they found a full corridor, pristine white walls, fluorescent lights, and hospital beds lined up like they'd been waiting. The wing was labeled 4C, but according to every record, Brightmoor only had 3 floors. They brought us in because of a foul smell leaking into the main ER. The air coming from 4C was stale, aged, not rotting, not chemical, just old, like the wing hadn't seen fresh oxygen in decades. We went in with respirators. The lights worked, but flickered like they'd been running on backup power. Everything was perfectly clean. No dust, no cobwebs. It was as if the place had been cleaned daily, despite no one being assigned to it. Every room was numbered, each with a metal bed, unused medical tools, and most disturbingly, patient charts. Charts for people who hadn't been admitted yet. Jason picked one up. Patient Rowan D. Sutherland, date of arrival, August 4th, 2025. Condition respiratory collapse status, pending expiration. The date was a week away. We flipped through more. Names we didn't recognize, but one stood out. Jason T. Miller, admitted August 12th, 2025. Cause, head trauma status, deceased, time of death, 3:44 a.m. He went silent. We took photos, tried to upload them. No signal. The phone said no network found. Then the hallway lights shut off, one by one, in a sequence that moved toward us, like the wing was closing in. We bolted. Back in the main hospital, no one believed us. The wing, gone. The hallway wall we entered through was now solid concrete, freshly painted. No cracks, no seam. We checked the CCTV footage. At the timestamp where we entered the wing, the footage blacked out for 6 minutes. When it returned, we were back in the lobby, out of breath, covered in grime. We don't remember those 6 minutes. A week later, I visited the hospital again, out of curiosity. They admitted a patient that morning, Rowan D. Sutherland, respiratory collapse, died that night, at 11:03 p.m. Jason and I don't speak about that wing anymore, but I watch the calendar now. He's due in 6 days, and I'm still wondering, what happens if you break the appointment? College dorms are usually an easy cleanup job. Spilled ramen, moldy socks, maybe a panic-induced pizza box graveyard. But when we were called to Belcroft University's dormitory Hall C, it wasn't for a mess. It was for a room that had been locked from the inside for nearly a month. The RA said a student named Tyler Harrington had filed several complaints about his roommate, Elias, before suddenly going silent. Campus police broke the door after Tyler's parents reported him missing. They found no sign of a struggle, no blood, just a mattress with deep indentations, like someone had been sleeping there every night. But here's the part that disturbed them. There was only one student registered in that dorm. Tyler. No record of an Elias, no admissions, no student ID, no guest logs. But Tyler had written about him repeatedly in emails to his parents, professors, and even in physical notebooks found in the room. Mentions of Elias watching me sleep. Elias doesn't blink when I talk, and most chilling, I think Elias draws people he wants to become. They found a locked desk drawer. Inside were over 40 sketches, detailed pencil drawings of Tyler asleep, Tyler in the shower, Tyler walking to class. None of them could have been self-portraits. Then came the last sketch. It was of 2 Tylers, identical, sitting on opposite beds, one smiling, the other staring at him. No pupils, just black holes where the eyes should be. That's when we noticed something strange. Every mirror in the room, bathroom, closet door, Even a compact pocket mirror had been smeared with charcoal, completely obscured. On the bathroom mirror, written backwards in soap, were the words, "Don't look at him through the glass." Campus security reviewed footage from the hallway. The cameras showed Tyler entering the room dozens of times, but never with anyone else. Yet in one clip, just as Tyler opened the door, a second figure, a faint reflection, flashed in the dorm lobby window behind him. It looked just like him. We found nothing else. No fingerprints but Tyler's. No signs of entry or exit. Tyler was declared a missing person. His last journal entry said, "I finally told Elias he's not real." He didn't like that. "Tonight, I sleep in the library." That entry was dated 2 days before he disappeared. But here's what haunts me the most. A year later, I was working another job in a different city. I stopped by a campus coffee shop, and a barista handed me my drink, smiling. His name tag said Elias, and he looked exactly like Tyler. If you shaved his head and removed the bags from his eyes, he didn't blink, not once. The job was in a gated estate in upstate Vermont, belonged to an eccentric billionaire named Reginald Thorne. He was known for collecting rare timepieces. Dozens of clocks lined the halls of his manor, but the centerpiece, the one he was obsessed with, was a massive custom-built grandfather clock that stood in the center of the house. Polished mahogany, etched brass gears, and a single ornate word engraved on the pendulum. Remember, according to the butler, Reginald had fired 3 different repairmen in the past year. Each one complained that the clock didn't follow time. They said it ticked normally until midnight. Then the chime would start again, but instead of stopping after 12, it would strike 13 times, always exactly 13. Every time. The strikes weren't fast either. Each one was slow, deliberate, vibrating through the walls like they were meant to be felt more than heard. The day we arrived, Reginald was nowhere to be found. The staff hadn't seen him in 2 days. His bedroom was untouched. The security system showed no exits, but the house smelled like cedar smoke, as if someone had been burning incense or wood in a sealed room. Jason and I focused on the clock. It was nearly midnight. We set up cameras, audio recorders, and waited. 11:59 p.m. The room grew cold, not drafty, cold, heavy like the air thickened. Midnight. Dong, dong. We counted. 10, 11, 12. Then pause. The pendulum stopped swinging. For a full 3 seconds, there was nothing. Then came the 13th. Dong. Lights in the house flickered. One of our cameras snapped off. A picture frame in the hallway shattered without being touched. And then the real horror began. The house changed. Subtly at first. Framed photos on the wall now showed Reginald standing beside people we didn't recognize. Some of them in futuristic-looking clothes, others in black and white attire from what looked like the 1800s. The date on the oven display said 13/13/13. Every door led to a different room than it had before. Jason opened what should have been a bathroom and stepped into a windowless library filled with moving books. He didn't go back in. We finally found Reginald, sort of. In the basement, in a chair facing the wall, sat a mannequin wearing his clothes. Clutched in its hands was a note. "The clock lets you step outside of time, but don't stay too long, or time steps out of you." We ran, but as we passed the grandfather clock on our way out, it chimed once more, a 14th time. Jason checked his phone later that night. The date said March 4th, 2091. We hadn't even noticed the trees were different outside. The next day everything went back to normal, but neither of us wears watches anymore, and I never trust clocks that don't stop at 12. The house was a modest 2-story in rural Georgia, built in the 1950s. Quiet place, the kind of property you'd drive past without noticing until something calls out. The owner, Miss Rowena Campbell, was in her 70s, lived alone. She called us not because of a mess, but because of a voice. She claimed that for several nights, she'd been hearing someone whispering from the floorboards beneath her bed. Not footsteps, not rats, words, "Help me, I'm still down here." Rowena thought maybe an animal had gotten trapped beneath the floor, or maybe she was losing her mind. But when she mentioned the voice knew her name, she got scared enough to call for help. The crawl space wasn't even accessible from inside the house. We had to go around back and pull up a loose vent screen. The opening was tight, barely enough for Jason to slide through. I waited outside, holding the flashlight. He crawled in about 10 feet, shining his light left and right. There's nothing here, just dirt, broken boards. Wait, silence. Then Jason's voice came back, but it sounded off, quieter, like it was coming from farther away than it should have. I found something, looks like fingers. I dropped down and squeezed in beside him. There, half buried in the packed dirt, were 5 pale, thin fingers sticking up, still intact, like they'd never decayed. But they weren't real, plastic, hollow, attached to a ventriloquist dummy, buried upside down. Its mouth was open. Someone had scratched into the wood inside its throat. I hear what you forget. The dirt around it had been disturbed recently, but there was no evidence of anyone entering the crawl space in decades. We pulled it out and showed it to Rowena. She went white. She remembered the dummy. My brother had that when we were kids. His name was Benjamin. He died, 1961, fell down the stairs and broke his neck. But here's the thing. She told us they buried Benjamin with the dummy in his casket, miles away, in a cemetery on the other side of town. We brought the dummy to the porch. Just as we stepped outside, Rowena screamed from inside. We ran back. The house was quiet, too quiet. Every clock had stopped. The hallway light swayed, but no windows were open. From the floorboards beneath her bedroom, we heard it. You took me out. Now something else can get in. We burned the dummy that night, but I still think about what the carving said. I hear what you forget. What have I forgotten? It happened just outside of Chicago. A rail maintenance worker named Leon was on the graveyard shift, walking a stretch of track that passed through an old industrial district. He was used to being alone. Just him, the steel, and the distant flicker of switch lights in the fog. But that night something strange happened. At exactly 2:13 a.m., he heard a rumble. The tracks began to vibrate. The train was coming, but nothing had been scheduled. His radio stayed silent. He stepped off the rail and waited. That's when it emerged from the fog. An old commuter train, silver and black, with windows so tinted they looked like mirrors. No headlights, no number, no destination sign, but it slowed to a stop right in front of him. The doors hissed open. Leon said he felt compelled to step inside. Something about the air. It was too still, too silent. He boarded. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered weakly. The seats were filled with passengers, silent, motionless, their heads all turned slightly toward the window, as if watching something outside, except there was nothing but darkness out there. Leon tried to speak. No one responded. He walked down the aisle. The passengers looked real, but their clothes were outdated, like they stepped out of different decades. A man in a World War II uniform, a woman in a 1920s flapper dress, a teenager with a Walkman, and then he saw the conductor. The man stood at the far end of the car, in a sharp black uniform. No face, just a reflection, like Leon was looking into a fogged-up mirror. The conductor raised a hand, palm open, and said in a calm, flat tone, "Ticket or memory?" Leon froze. "What? Ticket or memory?" The voice repeated. "Your fare." He didn't have a ticket, so he said, "Memory?" The conductor nodded once, and in that moment, Leon felt something rip inside his mind, like a page being torn from a book. Suddenly, he couldn't remember his daughter's birthday. Her face faded, her laugh gone. A memory had been taken. The train began to move. Leon panicked, ran back to the door, and jumped out. He landed hard on the gravel, bruised and dazed. The train disappeared into the fog without a sound. The next morning, his co-workers found him wandering the tracks. He couldn't explain where he'd been. But the worst part, he still rides that route sometimes. And every now and then, when the fog is just right, he hears the faint rattle of metal. A train slowing down for no one. The job came from a property manager in downtown Milwaukee. A mid-rise apartment complex built in the 70s. Nothing fancy. But the call wasn't about a normal cleanup. The man on the phone sounded uncertain. He said, "It's going to sound crazy, but I swear this floor wasn't here last week." Apparently the building had a 6th floor. Then one morning, a resident took the elevator and noticed a new button. No one had reported construction, no permits were filed, and none of the blueprints ever showed more than 6 floors. But now the building had 7, at least in the elevator. The stairwell didn't go up that high, and no one who got off on floor 7 ever answered their phones again. The last person to try was a tenant named Elise. She was a freelance graphic designer, used to staying up late. She messaged a friend at 3:11 a.m., saying, "Going to check out the weird new floor lol. If I disappear, avenge me." She never replied after that. So, we were hired. We arrived at noon. Everything looked normal. The elevator was old, worn buttons, flickering backlight, but sure enough, there was a new 7, no scratches around it, like it had always been there. We pressed it. The ride up felt off. It took longer than it should have, maybe a minute. The lights in the elevator dimmed, and for a moment, the overhead music warped, like a cassette melting. Then the doors opened. The hallway looked pristine, too pristine. Cream-colored walls, identical wooden doors, perfect silence. No buzzing lights, no air vents. It smelled like disinfectant and dust, but with something beneath it, something sour. We checked the door closest to the elevator. Apartment 701. The handle turned easily. Inside was a fully furnished living room. Furniture bolted to the floor. A TV on, playing static. No windows. The walls were too smooth, like fake drywall. That's when we saw the paintings. Each room had portraits, but not of people. They were of the viewers, slightly distorted versions of whoever stood in front of them. I saw myself, but my face was twisted, smeared like melted wax, and my eyes were missing. Jason's portrait showed him asleep in bed, but he hadn't taken that photo. Then the door slammed. We couldn't get out. The hallway was gone. The apartment began to change. Walls shifted, doors disappeared. At one point, Jason opened a closet and saw an elevator shaft filled with static, like TV snow drifting in space. We only escaped because the power went out. Complete darkness. And when the lights came back, we were standing back in the elevator. No floor 7, just 1 through 6. They say Elise's apartment was empty when police broke in. Her phone was left charging. Her laptop was open. No trace of her. And here's the kicker. Every building we visited since that job, we checked the elevator. And sometimes, just sometimes, floor 7 flickers into view for half a second. Just enough to remind us it's still there, waiting.